Coming up on Arirang News, the foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan meet in Bangkok to talk about Japan's trade curbs on Korea. But it looks like there was no breakthrough as Japan gets ready to ramp up its restrictions in a big way. The U.S. Federal Reserve cuts interest rates for the first time in 10 years by 25 basis points. Wall Street closes sharply lower, however, and President Trump says he wanted a bigger cut. And North Korea clarifies that what it tested yesterday was a rocket-launched system rather than a new missile. And the launch was overseen by leader Kim Jong-un himself. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Many were surprised by North Korea's launch yesterday of a second round of missiles in the space of a week. The North says it was testing a new rocket system, however, rather than a new rocket. And it says the launch was overseen personally by Kim Jong-un. Oh Jung-hee has the latest.
North Korea says it test-fired a newly developed large-caliber multiple-launch-guided rocket system on Wednesday, countering South Korea military's analysis. On Thursday, Pyongyang's state-run Korean Central News Agency released a report on Wednesday's rocket test. It said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un personally oversaw the test firing of a newly developed multiple rocket launcher. The report added that the system has met its test requirements and proved its combat effectiveness. The KCNA further added that Kim Jong-un was pleased with the test launch and said the weapon would be a worrisome reminder to those who might fall under its crosshairs. The report didn't clarify who that target may be, but speculation is that the North is once again taking aim at South Korea for its joint military exercises with the U.S. scheduled for later this month. But unlike last week, Pyongyang didn't explicitly say that the launch was an intended show of force, instead describing it as just a simple test. What the North says it fired, a multiple launch-guided rocket system, is different from the South Korean military's analysis, which announced that North Korea had fired a short-range ballistic missile on the day of the launch on Wednesday. Despite the latest reports from North Korea, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff has stuck by their original analysis.
Intelligence authorities of South Korea and the US see that the ones fired yesterday have similar flying characteristics with the new type of short-range ballistic missiles fired last week. We are still precisely analyzing the traits.
The multiple rocket launchers and short-range ballistic missiles have similar ranges, and therefore it is possible that the military could have confused the two. But the South Korean military's analysis, which could have been wrong, came on the same day Seoul's defense minister showed confidence that the military has secured high-tech systems to detect and defend against North Korean threats. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's spy agency says it's keeping close tabs on any additional missile testing by North Korea this month. At a parliamentary meeting on Thursday, Seo-hun, the chief of the National Intelligence Service, was quoted by lawmakers as saying that there appears to be a practical need for Pyongyang to develop its weapons system before resuming denuclearization talks with the U.S. He added that further launches could also come in protest against Seoul's introduction of F-35 stealth fighter jets and planned joint military drills with Washington. As for developments regarding Cho Sang-gil, a former North Korean envoy to Italy who disappeared last year, the spy agency reportedly said that he has left Rome and is under protection somewhere else. Cho went missing with his wife in November, likely to seek asylum. The UN Security Council will hold a closed-door meeting Thursday, local time, to discuss North Korea's recent missile launches. This will be the first time since the North and the U.S. started their diplomacy in earnest a year and a half ago. Hong Yu reports.
Britain, France, and Germany have requested for the UN Security Council to meet behind closed doors to discuss the growing concerns that Pyongyang is violating the UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles on Wednesday, according to the South Korean military, just days after 2 similar launches. Pyongyang is banned from conducting ballistic missile launches of any kind by UN Security Council resolutions aimed at denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. Speaking on Wednesday local time, a spokesman for the UN says Secretary General Antonio Guterres believes the missile launches were just another reminder of the importance of restarting talks on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The Council meeting on Thursday local time will be the first since diplomatic efforts to denuclearize the regime gained momentum in early 2018. Hopes for reviving stalled denuclearization talks have been high since U.S. President Donald Trump met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the DMZ on June 30th. But on Thursday, North Korea's state news agency said the missile launches were aimed to pressure South Korea and the United States to stop upcoming military drills, which it called the root cause of confrontation and war. 홍유, Arirang News.
A North Korean soldier has been taken into custody by South Korean authorities after crossing the border late last night inside the DMZ. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff say the soldier was spotted moving southward along the Imjingang River late Wednesday, having gone beyond the military demarcation line. During a probe, the North Korean soldier is said to have expressed his desire to defect to South Korea. The military says there were no unusual movements by North Korean forces at the time. Japan is widely expected to make a decision this Friday to take South Korea off its white list of countries that get preferential trade conditions. South Korea's foreign affairs minister met with her Japanese counterpart earlier today to once again urge Japan not to take that course, but it doesn't seem like there was a breakthrough. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Lee Ji-won, is in Bangkok for us. Ji-won?
Devin, so the meeting this morning lasted about an hour, and despite South Korea's strong message to Japan not to aggravate the situation, it looks like Japan will move forward with taking Seoul off of its white list of countries that get preferential trade conditions tomorrow. A senior official at South Korea's foreign ministry told reporters soon after the sit-down that Japan remains firm in its stance and that the differences could not be narrowed down. He said Minister Kang asked Minister Taro Kono to cease Japan's unfair trade restrictions on Seoul imposed earlier this month, as well as to stop its move to take South Korea off the white list. Now, while Japan argues that the move is based on security concerns related to South Korea, it seems to be clearly a retaliation for South Korean court rulings last year that Japanese firms must compensate Koreans who are forced to work for them during Japan's colonial rule. Now, this is in line with how Japan continued to discuss the forced labor issue when discussing these trade restrictions even today. In response, Seoul hinted to Japan that it might choose not to renew the two countries' military information sharing pact at the end of this month.
If Japan decides to take South Korea off its whitelist tomorrow, we're going to have to take necessary countermeasures as well. Japan cited security concerns for its trade restrictions on Seoul, so we told them that we have no choice but to review various security-related ties as well.
Now, as much as South Korea has made efforts right until the last minute to solve the issue diplomatically, a senior foreign affairs official in step with Kang's comments told reporters what happens next as a result of Japan's actions.
All right, Lee Ji-won reporting there from Bangkok. Thank you for that. Now, President Moon Jae-in met this Thursday with members of his cabinet to review what's happening with Japan's export controls. His spokesperson, in a text message to reporters, said the president was briefed by related ministers, including Finance Chief Hong Nam-gi, Trade Minister Sung Yun-mo, and Defense Chief Chung Kyung-do. At this point, it is expected that Japan will move tomorrow to remove Korea from that white list. It's reportedly not interested in having the U.S. mediate either. Kim Yo-sun reports.
Japan plans to push forward with its plan to remove South Korea from its white list of countries that enjoy preferential treatment in trade. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said Wednesday that such a measure is necessary for Tokyo's security.
The relationship between Japan and South Korea has been extremely difficult due to the numerous negative actions by South Korea. There is no change to our stance that we would urge South Korea to take constructive actions based on our consistent stance towards many issues.
The comments came just hours after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he plans to sit down with the foreign ministers of Seoul and Tokyo on the sidelines of ASEAN meetings in Bangkok. But Japan's Kyodo News Agency reports Tokyo will not embrace Washington's mediation, adding Japan will continue to deliver its consistent stance to the U.S. Japanese Trade Minister Hiroshige Seko also stressed Tokyo will press ahead with the export curbs. Japanese media forecast the cabinet will approve the measure on Friday, enabling it to come into force later this month. Meanwhile, the Japanese Communist Party has urged the ruling Liberal Democratic Party to halt Seoul's exclusion from Tokyo's whitelist. In a written opinion to the Japanese government, the party said it was concerned such a move would seriously damage bilateral relations. It also stressed the two countries need to resolve such tensions through diplomacy. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a South Korean parliamentary delegation visiting Tokyo has expressed anger after a Japanese lawmaker they were supposed to meet with canceled. The lawmakers were due to sit down with Toshihiro Nikai, Secretary General of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, and who is close to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But the Japanese side scrapped the talks, citing an urgent security meeting. The delegation called the cancellation a diplomatic discourtesy, saying that it indicates a strong willingness on Tokyo's part to go ahead and remove Seoul from its trade whitelist this Friday.
It appears that the Liberal Democratic Party is trying to avoid this by using the excuse of an emergency party meeting on North Korea's missile tests. This raises concerns that this might be a signal that it will decide to take Seoul off its trade whitelist.
That meeting had already been postponed from the original agreement of Wednesday. The South Korean lawmakers are in Tokyo to try and ease the trade tensions and find a diplomatic solution. They'll wrap up their two-day visit this evening after holding talks with members of Japan's opposition parties, as well as a press conference with correspondents in Tokyo. Back here in Seoul, South Korea's National Assembly will hold a plenary session later today to finally vote on the multi-billion-dollar extra budget proposal and other bills. The full floor meeting had initially been scheduled for 2 p.m. Korea time, but has been delayed to give the Budget Committee more time to finish its deliberations. The budget bill, worth around $5.7 billion was submitted almost 100 days ago now. When the session is held, lawmakers will first vote on other bills related to people's livelihoods, as well as resolutions urging Japan to lift its export restrictions and condemning the recent military flights by China and Russia that violated Korea's air identification zone. It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at QM Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for coming on.
Thank you for having me today.
So the South Korean and Japanese foreign ministers meeting face-to-face today in Bangkok. Things were reportedly tense. It's expected that we're only one day away from Japan deciding to take another big step in restricting trade by taking it off that white list. Do you think that this meeting will have done anything to change that?
Well, looking at the market, it seems that nothing has occurred between these two parties meeting. As you said, the diplomatic ministers from both South Korea and Japan held talks today in Bangkok, but it seems that really nothing really came out of this talk, it seems. The Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa said that the Korea will talk about relationship between two countries, that it should not be catastrophic, and is that needs the resolution to become as soon as possible. But it seems that the Japanese foreign minister seems to be sticking to his government's current stance is that Korea should be taken off from the list. Now, probably on Friday, the decision will be made, but Korean market, with the expectation that maybe the list will be okay, and that resulted into market recovering to positive territories despite the U.S. market falling quite sharply as last night. But as the later afternoon, with the concern that the whitelist will be removed for Korea maybe on Friday, that resulted into equity market falling quite sharply. In terms of whether this will be actually any kind of resolution will come out, we're not sure because it seems that both political parties are putting political interest in front of the economic concerns at this point in time.
Yeah, in other news, as expected, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates by 25 basis points, the first cut in 10 years. What was behind that decision, and where does the Fed go from here?
Right. The Powell chairman have said that it was definitely on the insurance side. On the press conference, he said that, and that kind of caused some concern that maybe the interest rate cut will not be happening any further or any more aggressive in the future. However, though, based on our analysis, we think that the U.S. inflation numbers are coming in well below target, which is around 1.6% on the PCE scale versus the target of 2%. And economy continues to show slowing down. In second quarter, it grew 2.1% from the quarter before. YOY, it's up about 2.3%. Yes, it is better than expected, but nevertheless, it is quite a sharp drop from the peak of 3.3% growth rate. And we think that that kind of growth rate will further go down with the continuation of protectionism happening globally, as well as U.S.-China trade talk being stagnant. So all being said, economic growth slowing down, resulting into lower inflation pressure, resulting into further rate cut in the future. We are expecting by end of next year, probably 4 times rate cut by Fed. Already once is done as of July 31st, or probably by end of this year, another rate cut, and maybe twice more next year.
Wow. Well, this first rate cut was widely expected, probably priced in, but still Wall Street was down by more than 1% across the board on Wednesday. What happened there, and how are other markets looking?
Sure. As I have said, Powell yesterday said it was definitely on the insurance side during the press conference. That caused concern by the investors because that means maybe it is not a start of a long-term series of interest rate cuts, but it is just a temporary adjustment measures. This caused panic selling. People were concerned that liquidity injection might be limited, and maybe the U.S. market might be in a high level of valuation territories. Also, with that news, dollar strengthened quite sharply. We have seen dollar hitting well above $98 index, which is one of the highest numbers that we've seen in the last few years. Now, with this, the U.S. market have corrected quite significantly. However, though, we are recommending that kind of correction is a positive or opportunities to buy into weakness because we do expect the dollar to be less strong in the future, meaning the continuation of the interest rate cut will result into lower dollar index. And also that will result into higher liquidity as well as a interest towards the emerging market in the future. So we think that the current investment strategy of buying into weaker dollar and also expecting higher emerging market index is still okay. Having said that, Korean market did recover at the beginning, but it has fallen and has declined by about 0.3% for Kospi and over 1% for Kosdaq. As for Japan, it actually was flat. As for China, it was down less than 1%, but still nevertheless down.
All right, Mr. Yu, got it. That's all the time we have for today, though. Thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump not satisfied with the rate cut. He said it was disappointing and too small, that Jerome Powell had let America down. Lee Min-sun reports.
The U.S. Federal Reserve lowered its interest rates on Wednesday for the first time since the 2008 global financial crisis. Led by Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, policymakers voted 8-2 in favor of a small cut. The cut, widely forecast by analysts, affects the cost of borrowing for credit cards and mortgages in the U.S. and will hover between the 2% to 2.25% range.
We decided today to lower the target for the federal funds rate by 0.25 percentage point to a range of 2% to 2.25%. The outlook for the U.S. economy remains favorable, and this action is designed to support that outlook.
President Trump has long criticized the Fed and its current chair, saying they are not doing enough to boost the American economy. However, according to Powell, the decision to cut rates was not affected by Trump's constant criticisms, but instead done in the hope it boosts the U.S. economy in the face of a global economic slowdown.
So we do think it'll serve all of those goals. But again, we're thinking of it as essentially in the nature of a mid-cycle adjustment to policy. This action is designed to ensure against downside risks to the outlook from weak global growth and trade tensions, offset the negative effect.
Major U.S. stock indexes plunged after the announcement. Watchers say Wall Street had priced in a more aggressive rate cut of 0.5 percentage point rather than the quarter-point cut that wound up happening. The smaller cut prompted a stock sell-off and pushed bond yields higher. Despite Powell saying the move isn't the start of a major easing cycle, market analysts believe further rate cuts may be in the pipeline. 이민선, Arirang News.
And responding to the Fed's rate cut, the Bank of Korea has also hinted at further readjustments to Korea's monetary policy if things get worse for both the domestic and global economies. Yoon Jung-min has the details.
South Korea's central bank governor Lee Ju-yeol said the U.S. Federal Reserve's rate cut happened as predicted, although it was less expansionary than what the market had expected. On his way to work on Thursday morning, Lee said to reporters that Wednesday's rate cut is more like a mid-cycle adjustment to policy rather than the beginning of a lengthy easing cycle, reiterating what Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said in a news conference after the Fed statement on Wednesday. Though it was less aggressive than expected, the governor added he is also paying attention to what the Fed will do to sustain the expansion. When asked about an additional rate cut by the Bank of Korea, Lee said the central bank cannot immediately respond to the latest Fed decision, but will consider economic circumstances inside and outside Korea to decide whether to further readjust its monetary policy. The central bank earlier lowered the key rate to 1.5% from 1.75% in July.
Since the Bank of Korea cut the key rate ahead of the Fed's move, the bank is not likely to immediately respond and lower the rate again. I think it's more important to look at the economic circumstances because there are many downside risks. Taken together, it may lower the rate once more in the second half of this year.
In a written response to the National Assembly's Finance Committee on the same day, the Bank of Korea also hinted it may further cut the key interest rate if economic circumstances worsen, particularly the U.S.-China trade conflict and Japan's export restrictions on South Korea. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Korea's exports plunged last month by 11% from a year ago. Again, it was mainly a decline in semiconductors, which account for a huge proportion of the country's exports. And with Japan piling on by cutting Korea off from key semiconductor materials, things are not likely to get better, at least in the short term. Kim Da-mi has more.
South Korea's exports fell in July for the 8th consecutive month. The Trade Ministry said on Thursday that the country's outbound shipments tumbled 11% on-year last month. Exports were tallied at around $46 billion, down from the $52 billion seen a year earlier. The ministry attributed the fall to slumping semiconductor prices as well as the U.S.-China trade war. South Korea's chip exports plummeted 28% on-year in July, a wider drop compared to the month of June. Imports fell 2.7% on-year last month to around $44 billion. But Japan's export curbs were not the main reason behind the fall in July.
Before the trade restriction was announced, Korean firms reported that they had about 3 months' worth of inventory of these chemicals. That's what they're using currently. And I do not expect the trade restrictions to affect the semiconductor industry until at the earliest around September.
Automobile and biohealth exports were the lone bright spots, increasing 22% and 10% respectively. In fact, automobile exports rose for the 4th straight month, a winning streak that hasn't been seen since 2017. By country, exports to China fell over 16% on-year in July, with those to the U.S. inching down 0.7%. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.